everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be another buy day. And today, we're going to talk about the man who was responsible for the destruction of more books than anyone else in the late 18th and 19th centuries. But probably not in the way you think. Let's get right to it. Today, I want to talk about a minister by the name of James Granger. And he is famous for publishing this book in 4 volumes in 1768. Now, Granger was a radical minister. Samuel Johnson called him a Whig, hiding in parson's clothing, and he didn't mean that as a compliment. He was also one of the first preachers to preach against the cruelty to animals. And this was a revolutionary thing in the 18th century. Nobody else was in the pulpit talking about this issue. And in fact, his parishioners got very upset with him. And this later became a sort of foundational sermon for the SPCA. But Granger's real love, Amanda, was the collection of prints. That's what he loved, even more than preaching. And he developed a book that was designed to literally be taken apart. Let me show you this book. First of all, and it just came in this week, fresh from England, where they had a copy. There's Granger himself. And then read the title, A Biographical History of England, from so-and-so to so-and-so. But most importantly, it's designed with a new system of biography that is developed into certain classifications. And if you flip over one more page, you'll see that he had certain classes of people. Well, there were kings at the top, and then at the bottom, what did he have? Well, he had ladies. I apologize for that. He also had painters and physicians, and he had it basically grouped in all these different classes. And what people would do is they would take the book, and then they would interleave prints that they would go and find and collect, destroying even more books in the process, until you created a new sort of do-it-yourself, choose-your-own-adventure version of Granger's book. And to give you a little bit more of a sense of what I'm talking about, Amanda, follow me over here, because one of the interesting things that we have here in the collectibles building is that we have literally thousands and thousands of 18th century engravings of individuals. These are the very types of engravings, and come a little closer so you can take a look at some of these. The very types of engravings that Granger and his friends would all go throughout Europe trying to collect. They'd go into rare bookstores, they'd say, oh, that's a good book, let's take that one. Oh, here's another one, let's take that one. And in the 18th century, you can tell a lot of these are really quite old. Engravings were actually printed and impressed on the paper. So if you look very closely, you can tell this is an older engraving because you can see the plate marks where the engraving was put down. Real wonderful works of art, and Granger's fad was so popular that it became named after him, and people began to Grangerize books. It became a huge fad that really in the Victorian age led to the concept of scrapbooking. That all came from Granger. To give you a sense of how thick the books would become, come on over here. This is our wall of catalog books here in the collectibles room. We're in British history. I just referenced Samuel Johnson. So let's take this book out. That's the original cover. But once the book was Grangerized, it became so thick that somebody had to put on a sort of modern binding. And then if you flip through the book, you'll see that the book is just filled with portrait after portrait after portrait collected in such a way as to extra illustrate the book. That makes each one of these books a unique work of art, which is pretty interesting. And the author here takes a rather liberal license with what he's putting in with Johnson, whereas Granger's system was much more classified and regular. All right, Amanda, here's a trivia question as we walk back to these books. Mm-hmm. All right, I want you to guess. Since this fad of Grangerization, people literally competed to see who could take this 4-book set and make it the thickest, filled with the most number of prints according to the Granger system. Would you like to know? Well, I won't ask you who got the record. I will ask you, how many prints do you think the record holder managed to squeeze into this 4-volume set?
I'm going to guess 500.
That is an excellent guess. But you would be way wrong, because a nobleman named Richard Bute, who lived on the Isle of Wight, he wrote back and forth with Granger, and he collected 14,000 prints. And he put them into a new set of Granger's work, which was rebound in 35 volumes. And it is now at the Huntington Library in California, if you want to see it. And one of the ways he was able to get 14,000 of those prints in is that he churned the books into folios. Here's like a little close-up example. And he was able, as a folio book, which means a big tall book, these are quartos, a big tall book, he could get 2 prints interleaved with the pages. And you could see that part of the process of Grangerization was taking the prints and sizing up the paper in such a way as it made sense. So 14,000 prints. Butte took the record, and to this day, Grangerization continues. I thought for the second book today, we'd take a closer look at a Grangerized book. And this one is fun, I have to say, because it is called Relics of Genius by Grimstead. Parts 1 and 2, and as you can see, it was illustrated and Grangerized. This is in the 19th century when Grangerization really took hold. We have 3/4 leather, we have marbleized boards, we have raised bands. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and it was bound by a bookseller who proceeded to do something special, which is put a little what's called a bookseller's ticket in it. And do you remember William Smith from last week? William Smith, or W.H. Smith, is the booksellers that set the foundation for Sir Joseph Porter. And we talked about it, but they also bound books. So somebody would take their prints, take the book, and send it over to have it rebound. Now, since it is a 2-volume set, they had to, that was originally 1 volume and unillustrated, they had to create their own title page. So this book has a sort of handwritten title page. And then you see if you flip it over, it then continues with 151 because they took a single volume and they turned it into 2. Other interesting aspects of this is you can see that the different engravings were sometimes different sizes, so you had to sort of embed them in paper of a matching size. So here's William Blake, which was too small, so they made it the same size, and then here's John Bunyan, which was a little big, so they trimmed it down, but they got them all equal to the same size. And what's particularly neat about this book, just topically, I found it very interesting. This is a book, and let's look at the title, that was all about going and visiting the grave sites of famous individuals. Relics of Genius, Visits to the Last Homes, meaning the graves of poets, painters, and players. A book that was absolutely designed to be Grangerized without any question. And then one final thing, if you look at the back of this book, there's an index to all the graves that the author went to. And this particular author has put check marks next to the ones that he has then illustrated and been to. So Benjamin West gets a check mark on page 80. Why? Because Benjamin West on page 80 is Grangerized and put in the book, which is pretty neat. So Grangerization, extra illustration, a Victorian fad that led to scrapbooking. All right, we're going to jump to my weekend. Last weekend, we went to Washington, D.C. We went to the National Portrait Gallery. And on the way to the National Portrait Gallery, we passed the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building. And so today's funny book is a sort of scary book from the 1950s about the lionization of J. Edgar Hoover, a man who now, we're talking about removing his name from the FBI building, but at the time was lionized. And can you imagine this book, made for school children, J. Edgar Hoover, Modern Knight Errant. And if you read this book, which is really, really scary and dedicated to young Americans who are proud of their heritage and who are growing up in the fine traditions of courage, humor, and common sense, oh my goodness, J. Edgar Hoover. Again, this is J. Edgar Hoover. This is the language. He was to ride forth, not in shining armor, though if he had worn armor, it would have been the most brightly polished of all, but in handsomely tailored clothes. Nor was he to go astride a horse, leaping over a moat, but in swift cars, fast trains, and speedy planes. J. Edgar Hoover, a modern knight errant, a modern-day lionization of a famous individual. All right, I hope you all had a wonderful time on Buy Day this week. We'll see you next week and every week for adventures in the book trade.